What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 15 brutal facts about auto da fe. The Inquisition's public torture ceremony. The auto da fe was what? The auto da fe became a religious and civic spectacle in Spain at the end of the 15th century. The phrase literally means act of faith, and the auto da fe was the climax of an Inquisition tribunal. In short, it was the moment of public penance, torture, and sometimes even death that heretics underwent if and when convicted of heresy. Facts about the auto da fe reveal a peculiar, cruel ceremony not so dissimilar from other forms of strange and slow forms of historical torture. Though most people think of brimstone and flames when they imagine punishment during the Spanish Inquisition, the auto da fe was not only about burning condemned men and women at the stake. While many people associate the auto da fe with the Spanish Inquisition, it is important to note that autos da fe were not practiced exclusively in Spain. Portugal, France, and European colonies around the world also enacted autos da fe. In many cases, actually, the colonies outdid Europe in scope. And, unlike other forms of torture and penance, they didn't focus specifically on women with the auto da fe. Autos da fe were practiced for a length of time that might surprise some people. But the stories of horror and tragedy that autos da fe brought are not going away anytime soon. And neither is the multitude of torture in artworks that they inspired. It was people's favorite form of theater. The auto da fe was the final stage of Inquisition proceedings. Though secrecy was paramount to the Inquisition trial stages leading up to the auto da fe, that was all abandoned on the day of the main event. Indeed, it was a form of public spectacle in which crowds of people turned up in city squares to watch the sentencing and punishment get carried out. As the ritual continued into the 17th century, the theater and spectacle of the auto da fe became even more elaborate, and common folks would eagerly read or listen to accounts of autos da fe they might have missed. Some of it involved people being burned alive. Burning was perhaps the harshest punishment a person could receive during their very public auto da fe. Burning alive was a horrible, agonizing way to die, but it also attracted hungry fans who wanted to see a show. In Logroño, Spain, in 1610, 6 condemned witches were burned alive, making it the largest witch burning of the Spanish Inquisition. Historians remain divided over exact numbers, but they generally agree that around 3,000 people were burned alive as a result of an auto da fe. Some people were lucky. They were condemned to be burnt in effigy rather than in body. Torture including having your limbs and head cut off was common. Though it was controversial, it was within the rights of inquisitors to use torture as a way to extract a confession during a trial. But the accused's suffering did not end when the trial did. The auto da fe, the final stage of an Inquisition trial, presented yet another opportunity for torture. If an accused person wasn't burned alive or sentenced to life in prison, a range of other punishments was possible. Some people were whipped and tortured in other brutal ways. In 1766, the 19-year-old François-Jean de la Barre was given one of the most shocking sentences. He was to have his arm and tongue cut off before being burned alive. Though his sentence was ultimately commuted to beheading and burning, it was still an outrage to people like Voltaire, who used the event to criticize the Catholic Church. It happened all around the world. The origin of the phrase auto da fe speaks to where the ritual was developed. It's Portuguese and means act of faith, as does the Spanish version, auto da fe. In the early modern world, Portugal and Spain were expanding their global reach and colonizing the so-called New World. So the Inquisition and autos da fe spread to the Americas, where they fit in nicely with Spain's missionary projects in North and South America. Autos da fe sprung up everywhere from Mexico City to Lima. But autos da fe weren't just in the Americas. Goa even had its own Inquisition from 1560 to 1812. The last auto da fe was in 1850 in Mexico. Autos da fe may have been a product of the early modern world, but they outlasted it. The autos da fe developed in the late 15th and 16th centuries, and the Enlightenment of the 18th century slowed them down a little bit in some parts of the world. But they actually continued well into the 19th century. Though the Inquisition in Mexico was abolished in 1820, there is a record of an auto da fe there as late as 1850. Hundreds of thousands of people probably went through it. It is difficult to estimate the exact number of people who had to suffer through an auto da fe. Enactment of autos de fe varied by location and time. Some autos de fe were larger and more frenzied than others. But historians generally agree that in the heyday of the auto de fe, hundreds of thousands of people had to go through the dangerous, harmful, and humiliating ritual, and only the lucky ones survived. It was both religious and political. Officially, the auto de fe was part of the Catholic Inquisition. Inquisitions were not civil affairs, they were handled by religious tribunals. At the same time, monarchical and governmental authorities played a part in the process. The Inquisition in Spain ramped up, for example, only when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella were able to appoint their own inquisitors and used them to challenge their political enemies. Civil authorities also collaborated in the Inquisition process, and they would have been present at an auto de fe. Indeed, only civil authorities could condemn an accused person to be burned at the stake. The worst that religious officials could do was sentence someone to life in prison. The actual public ritual could last hours. Though autos de fe often varied in size and scale, the most elaborate auto de fe spectacles were huge public affairs. In Latin America, for example, these large-scale events took place over the course of several hours. Events would start the night before the spectacle, when a procession that included church officials and a choir marched through the streets. A second procession including civic officials and aristocrats happened the following morning. After the procession, spectators would utter an oath of loyalty, hear a sermon, and then watch the sentencing. Until the auto de fe, prisoners were kept in the dark about their fate. The Inquisition's proceedings relied heavily on secrecy. This meant that prisoners would endure their trials only to have to wait longer to hear their fate. Often, they had to wait several days through the pomp and circumstance of the auto de fe to finally hear their sentence. Officials did this to limit the number of appeals higher courts might receive in the wake of trials. But waiting to hear their fate proved too excruciating for some, and there are records of prisoners committing suicide before hearing their sentencing. The autos de fe were about power. Autos de fe were about the spectators and the power of the Catholic Church as much as they were about the individual victims. The public spectacle of autos de fe meant that everyone could see what they considered to be holy justice unfolding before them. Sinners were obviously punished, and so they served as a cautionary tale to all the spectators. The pomp and circumstance of the spectacle also accentuated the power of the Church as an institution that could discipline and punish by whatever means it deemed fit. Many of the victims weren't Catholic, even though it was a test of faith. The act of faith was specifically a mechanism to keep Catholics in line. But many of the victims of the auto de fe weren't actually even Catholic. Autos de fe punished anyone who was labeled a heretic. This included former Jews, Muslims, Protestants, and individuals who were skeptical of religion. To put it succinctly, anyone who did not adhere to the directives and expectations set forth by the Catholic Church ran the risk of being brought before a tribunal and subjected to an auto de fe. The spectrum of potential crimes included witchcraft and bigamy. Though what counted as heresy created a pretty broad umbrella, there was a relatively large spectrum of crimes that might result in an auto de fe. Most people thought that these were crimes against religion. First and foremost, anyone who did not adhere to Roman Catholic doctrine could be targeted. But allegations made against someone of things like witchcraft or bigamy could also land that person in front of a tribunal. Not everyone loved a good burning. By the 18th century, Europe was deep in the age known as the Enlightenment, a time when the values of tolerance and humanitarianism began to take root. But progress wasn't universal. Autos de fe persisted in many parts of Europe and its colonies into the 19th century. Voltaire, one of the leading figures of the French Enlightenment, was a fierce critic of autos de fe. He even satirized them in his anti-religious work Candide. The accused had to wear special clothing to mark and humiliate them. As part of the spectacle of the auto de fe, prisoners had to appear in special clothing. Known as the San Benito, the garments were a coated yellow tunic that would reveal a prisoner's crimes and fate. They were decorated with symbols and colors. People who were condemned to die wore the Samara tunic, which had pictures of flames sewn on it. The condemned had to walk through the streets in this garment with a rope around their neck and while carrying a candle. Often they also wore large pointed hats. Mexico hosted one of the largest autos de fe ever. In some ways, the colonies outdid Europe in terms of autos de fe. The largest auto de fe in the Americas happened in Mexico in 1649. Over 100 so-called Judaizers were condemned for supposedly trying to convert people to Judaism. Of those, 13 were burned at the stake. The auto de fe, meaning act of faith, was one of the most terrifying and brutal public rituals of punishment in European history, particularly during the height of the Inquisition, beginning in Spain in the late 15th century and extending its reach across Portugal, France, and their colonies in the Americas and elsewhere. Though its name might sound deceptively pious, the auto de fe was a grim, elaborate spectacle in which heretics, or those merely accused of heresy, were publicly shamed, tortured, and sometimes executed in horrifying ways that shocked even contemporary observers. Far from a mere religious affair, it was a civic, cultural, and political event designed to enforce orthodoxy and instill fear. Crowds gathered in city squares, not just for justice, but for entertainment, eager to witness the downfall of the accused. The ritual was a theatrical performance of punishment, complete with elaborate processions, special garments, hymns, sermons, and often excruciating death. Even though most people think of burning at the stake, the auto de fe included a wide range of brutal punishments, including mutilation, public whipping, and life in prison. The auto de fe did not operate in a vacuum. It was deeply embedded in colonial ambition, religious control, and monarchic authority, with trials often cloaked in secrecy, and verdicts revealed only on the day of execution. Shockingly, some of the worst abuses occurred not in Europe, but in colonial outposts like Mexico City and Lima, where records show thousands subjected to these barbaric rituals. Though Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire harshly criticized the practice, and it eventually fell out of favor in some regions, the final recorded auto de fe didn't occur until 1850 in Mexico, a chilling testament to its persistence. Victims ranged widely and included Jews, Muslims, Protestants, indigenous people, and even skeptics and intellectuals. The accused, often arrested on flimsy or fabricated evidence, were forced to wear humiliating garments like the San Benito, yellow tunics marked with flames and symbols indicating their alleged crimes, and sometimes ridiculous pointed hats. Public processions would feature these doomed souls, paraded through jeering crowds, rope around their necks, candles in hand, only to be sentenced hours later, often without ever having learned their fate beforehand. Torture wasn't just a tool for extracting confessions during the secretive trials that preceded the auto de fe. It was part of the performance. Limbs were broken, tongues and arms cut off, heads severed, and in one particularly infamous case, that of 19-year-old François de la Barre in 1766, beheading followed by burning. The charges: he had allegedly desecrated a crucifix. Even after the Enlightenment began promoting values like tolerance and humanitarianism, the church and state in many regions doubled down on these horrific punishments, asserting control through spectacles that reaffirmed their power over body and soul. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the auto de fe was that it enjoyed widespread public support. People treated it as theater, crowding into city squares to cheer, gossip, and marvel at the elaborate pageantry of death. Accounts were published and distributed, cementing these acts not only in history but also in cultural imagination. Whether in Goa, India, or Lisbon, Portugal, the reach of the Inquisition and its punishing arm stretched far and wide. In 1649, Mexico witnessed one of the largest autos de fe in the New World, in which more than 100 people were condemned as Judaizers, with 13 of them burned alive. These events were not only religious spectacles but also deeply political tools used by monarchs like Ferdinand and Isabella to suppress dissent and centralize power. Even the process of judgment was opaque. Prisoners were often kept in suspense until the very last moment, isolated and unaware of their charges or fate. Some, driven mad or hopeless, committed suicide before sentencing. The very structure of the auto de fe, from its processions to its punishments, was meticulously designed to inspire fear and compliance. With estimates suggesting that hundreds of thousands endured this ritual across centuries, it stands as one of the most harrowing chapters in the history of institutionalized cruelty. And perhaps most unsettling of all is that, for centuries, this was seen not as atrocity but as justice, an act of faith that revealed the darkest corners of human belief and the terrifying extent to which societies will go to enforce it. 15 horrifying facts about auto de fe, the public torture ceremony of the Inquisition. The auto de fe, or auto de fe in Portuguese, was one of the most horrifying spectacles of the Spanish Inquisition, a grotesque fusion of religious fervor, judicial punishment, and public entertainment. Translating to act of faith, this macabre ceremony was the grand finale of an Inquisition trial, where accused heretics were publicly humiliated, tortured, or executed in front of ravenous crowds. While many associate the Inquisition with secret trials and dungeon tortures, the auto de fe was anything but hidden. It was a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to instill terror, reinforce Catholic orthodoxy, and demonstrate the absolute power of the Church and Crown. From burnings at the stake to mass executions in the New World. Here are 15 brutal facts about this dark ritual that dominated Europe and its colonies for over 350 years. 1. It was the people's favorite form of theater. The auto de fe was public entertainment on a grand scale. While the Inquisition trials were held behind closed doors, the sentencing was a grand public spectacle. Thousands would gather in city squares to watch as the condemned were paraded, tortured, and executed. By the 17th century, these events became so elaborate that they resembled religious festivals, complete with processions, sermons, and even printed programs detailing the accused crimes. People who missed the event could read detailed accounts in pamphlets, making it an early form of gruesome mass media. 2. Some victims were burned alive. The most infamous punishment was burning at the stake. Those convicted of unrepentant heresy, like crypto-Jews or Protestants, faced this agonizing fate. 1610, Lograno, Spain. 6 accused witches were burned alive in the largest witch execution of the Spanish Inquisition. Approximately 3,000 people were burned in total. Some lucky convicts were strangled first. Others were burned alive and screaming. 3. Before being executed, torture included mutilation. Even if a victim did not burn, they would be subjected to horrific mutilations. Whipping, sometimes until death. Amputation of the limbs. No hands, feet, or tongues. Public flaying, skin stripped in strips. One of the most infamous cases was François-Jean de la Barre, 1766, a French nobleman who had his tongue torn out and hand severed before being burned. Voltaire later used his case to attack church brutality. 4. It spread all over the world. The auto de fe wasn't just a Spanish phenomenon. It traveled with colonialism. Mexico City, 1649. 13 Judaizers burned in the largest New World auto de fe. Lima, Peru. Public executions of accused heretics. Goa, India, 1560 to 1812. The Portuguese Inquisition burned Hindus, Muslims, and converts. 5. The last auto de fe was in 1850, Mexico. Though the Inquisition was officially abolished in the early 1800s, records show an auto de fe still occurred in Mexico in 1850, proving the ritual outlived the Enlightenment. 6. Hundreds of thousands suffered. Exact numbers are debated, but historians estimate 150,000 plus trials, 3,000 to 5,000 executions, many more tortured or imprisoned. 7. It was both religious and political. The Inquisition wasn't just about faith. It was a tool of state control. Ferdinand and Isabella used it to purge political rivals. Church and crown worked together to suppress dissent. 8. The ceremony could last 12+ hours. A full auto de fe was an all-day event. Night before, a solemn procession with clergy and prisoners. Morning, a sermon and oath of loyalty from the crowd. Afternoon, the sentencing and executions. 9. Prisoners didn't know their fate until the last moment. To prevent appeals, the accused were kept in suspense until the final ceremony. Many committed suicide rather than face the horror. 10. It was about power and fear. The auto de fe was psychological terror. Public humiliation, forced to wear shameful garments. Mass intimidation, showing what happened to heretics. 11. Many victims weren't even Catholic. The Inquisition targeted Jews, conversos accused of secretly practicing Judaism, Muslims, Moriscos suspected of Islamic faith, Protestants, witches, and blasphemers. 12. Crimes included witchcraft and bigamy. Heresy charges were broad: practicing Islam or Judaism in secret, witchcraft, especially in Legrano, 1610, bigamy, blasphemy, and immoral books. 13. Enlightenment thinkers hated it. By the 1700s, critics like Voltaire mocked the auto de fe as barbaric. His satire Candide featured a character burned for marrying his godmother. 14. Victims were forced to wear humiliating garments. The San Benito, a yellow penitential tunic, marked the condemned. Flames equals death sentence. Crosses equals life imprisonment. Pointed hats, carrozas, equals public shame. 15. One of the largest was in Mexico, 1649. In Mexico City, over 100 Judaizers were sentenced, 13 burned alive in a single day. Conclusion: a dark legacy of fear. The auto de fe was more than just punishment. It was theater of terror, designed to purge heresy and enforce absolute obedience. These spectacles ruled Europe and its colonies for more than 3 centuries, resulting in mass suffering, fanaticism, and torture. Though the last auto de fe faded in the 1800s, its shadow lingers, a chilling reminder of what happens when religion and power merge into tyranny.